Woohoo, look at that body roll. 1988 BMW M5. This is the E28 generation, the one that started it all, the first M5. And today we're reviewing it. These were actually produced from 1984 to 1988. And they used a modified version of the engine from the BMW M1 from 1978, that legendary supercar. Although in the US, we didn't get the proper M88 engine. And of course, there were differences between the M1, you know, dry sump, wet sump, etc. But here in the US, we got a smaller engine, the S38, which is a 3.5 liter inline six, pushing out 256 horsepower, 243 pound-feet of torque. These are actually quite rare in the US, only about 2,000 made. And in terms of mods, the prior owner actually did quite a bit. We have the Fahey crank hub, the Conforti performance chip, cold air intake, SLS delete, E34 rear brakes. You can tell the brakes are aftermarket because we have these drilled rotors. Bilstein and ST springs. And now I'm gonna tell you how she drives. First thing that's super impressive about this car, 1988, these power adjustable seats. Check out these buttons in the middle right here. You have, I mean, they have everything. They got, you know, up, down, the tilting, even the headrest, power headrest, which is just incredible for 1988. We got a 5-speed manual transmission. You gotta love how smooth BMW inline six engines are. This may not be the smoothest BMW inline six ever made, but it's still a very smooth engine. Made it to this 5-speed manual transmission. Classic 3-spoke steering wheel design. A very classic looking interior now. There's no tilting or telescoping to the steering wheel, and it's kind of angled down a little bit more than I would expect. Relatively thin rim, and the first few generations of M5 have a recirculating ball rather than rack and pinion, so the steering is not as sophisticated. But in a car from this time period, it feels very much period correct. You're not expecting, you know, a GT4 RS steering rack on a car like this. You have a little bit of play in the middle here, as you can see, and it is also a slower ratio, but it's quite light. Hydraulically assisted, of course. The brakes are feeling nice. That's, you know, of course, these are aftermarket. Nice initial bite, and I'm sure that if it was stock brakes, it wouldn't inspire as much confidence. Look at that body roll, even with these aftermarket suspension components, which is good, right? You don't want the car to feel uncharacteristically tight and taut. This is a car where it's still sporty and fun, but it also is much more of just a cruiser. You're not bombing hills with razor sharp precision. You're arriving places in style. In comfort, with speed, of course, at least by the standards of that day in the 1980s. This is a quick vehicle. And I personally think the styling is quite timeless. I love the boxy BMWs from the 80s and 90s. A lot of vagueness, a lot of play in the steering wheel, and once you get to a corner, it doesn't inspire that much confidence. So much of what you get back from the car is delayed, and therefore you don't feel as comfortable pushing it as hard because it's slow to deliver that information back to you you don't want to get yourself into a hairy situation. Suspension feeling a little bit crashy over these bumps. But again, not in a punishing way and not in a way that's not congruent with the rest of the vehicle. Oh man, what a slow steering ratio. Look at that. Woo! It's such a treat to drive this car. This is the first one that started it all. So many of us love M5s. In fact, not this generation, but a later generation of M5 was my dream car for a long time as a kid. Bringing her out all the way to 7,000 RPM. And these shifts, guys, these are a mile long, so long. And again, this is very period correct. There's a lot of like laxity to the inputs, right? And I think that's part of the charm of the vehicle. You have really long throws of the transmission. Even the clutch, it's not a super tight and taut clutch. It has a little bit of give, a little bit of play, a little bit of wiggle to it. Same with the steering wheel. The engine is nice and smooth, but not overly so where it feels too refined. It still feels like it has a little bit of that gruff to it. If you can hear that, this is totally the right road for this car. Nice gradual sweepers. You don't want something too tight and technical for a car like this. You want to enjoy the speed in comfort in your businessman executive saloon. I do find it quite interesting that BMW was using rack and pinion in the 3 Series, the M3, even starting with the first generation, the E30, but when it came to the M5, they started with a recirculating ball for quite a while, the first 3 generations. And in the E39, it's because the engine, the engine bay, the V8 was so large, they didn't have space. So it was more packaging issues because the other lower trims of the E39 did. And I always find that kind of curious that, yeah, definitely a bit crashy here over these bumps. Tied back to a philosophical difference between what the M3 and M5 were supposed to be. I gotta say, the rev matching is actually a little more intuitive than I would expect. The throttle response is quite immediate and what you would expect of it. Normally with older cars, even the throttle response takes a little bit of getting used to. Oh yeah, that body roll, baby. Work it, mama. This car gives me a sense of like ease and flow, and it wants to be driven at 6 or 7 times, not higher than that. It wants to have a good time, but it's like, hey man, let's enjoy life, let's take it easy. We don't have to take things too seriously. We can go quickly without overexerting ourselves. And maybe I'm answering my question from earlier, which is the philosophical difference between the M3 and the M5. Is this supposed to be larger, more comfortable? I mean, by modern standards, this is quite light and small, 3,100 pounds. And you look at this M5 versus the more recent generation, it seems like a totally different vehicle just based on the size alone. I love that little raspiness. It reminds you that you're in a car from several decades ago, when emissions were more lax, when safety standards were more lax. Not that it was necessarily better. There were some things that were better about that time, some things that are worse. I'm not one of those people that is super cynical about cars today. Because there are things that are better and worse about cars today versus the 1980s and 1990s and 2000s and so on. It was only after driving the first 5 M5 generations, we didn't drive the final F90, that I came to this conclusion where there's 3 pairings of M5. And this was the first ever one, which was old school and analog. But the E34 that came right after it was the same old school and analog, but really refined it and tweaked it in a way it felt like a finished product, whereas this was the first foray into a new arena. For the full comparison, you're gonna wanna watch the other M5 videos linked in the description. My friends, let me know what you think of the E28 BMW M5. Comment down below. If you want your car reviewed, visit us on jabbalandcars.com. Big thanks to Fenton's son from the Zygoon YouTube channel for making this review possible. Go show him some love. Much love, my friends. And I'll see you all in the next one.